We've been asked to identify at least 4 distinct polar coordinates and graph r equals 2 sine of 3 theta. So I see a rose curve, if I recognize this equation. If I don't, maybe my graphing calculator can help me out. If I'm thinking about rose curves and I remember that this number in here tells me about the number of petals, when it's odd, I get that number of petals. When it's even, I'd have to double it. So here I'm just going to have 3 petals. But let's make sure I'm right about that. My calculator is in the radian and polar mode here, 2 sine of 3 theta. And I see my 3 petals. They are all 2 pi thirds rotations from each other. And I think I'm ready to graph this. And I can think about what angles go right through these petals, right? This is 270 degrees straight down, and that means that's 120 degrees away from it, which would be 30 degrees. So I'm going to start thinking about the angles I'm going to plot with a 30-degree angle. So I do prefer to think in radians, so I'm going to say pi 6. And now 120 degrees 2 pi later would be at 5 pi 6. And then finally, I know 3 pi halves. And kind of suspiciously, I left a blank spot on my table because I need at least 4 points, and I realize I also go through the pole. And if I plug in a 0, well, sine of 0 is 0, and I'll be going through the origin, right? I'll have a point there at the pole. So now let's imagine plugging in a pi 6. I get 3 pi 6, right? And the sine of 3 pi over 6 is, of course, 1, because that's pi halves, so I get out a 2. All right, imagine plugging in 5 pi 6 there. I have to multiply it by 3. I get 5 pi halves, which, well, sine of 5 pi halves, like the sine of pi halves, is just 1, so I get out a 2. And then finally, I plug in the 3 pi halves. I get 9 pi over 2, which, again, has that same reference angle of pi halves. So I just get a whole bunch of 2's there in my table. And just like in the last example I did, instead of counting out, I'm just going to let the last circle here represent 2 units away from the pole, and at 30 degrees, well, I'm 2 units away. At 5 pi over 6, I'm 2 units away. At 3 pi halves, I'm 2 units away. And of course, at 0, I was at the pole. So I'm ready to trace out my 3-petaled rose curve. And I'm not really tracing this out probably in 100% the right order, but I might be close. That one's definitely backwards, just easier to draw that way. And there I have a 3-leaved rose. And that's it for now.